In Jonah chapter 1, God calls his prophet Jonah to go to the city of Nineveh. When we look in the Bible for places where we find God and the city, we actually find um, a lot of references. We often think the Bible is a rural book written to shepherds or um, about the harvest field and other analogies where we find a lot about the rural countryside, and it is. But there's more than 1,200 references to cities in the Old and New Testaments. So the Bible is both a rural book and an urban book. And one of the famous passages, of course, is Jonah. And Jonah chapter 1 and verse 2, God says to Jonah, "Go to the great city of Nineveh." Now, notice right off the start there that God speaks to Jonah and he says, "Go to the great city." I sense a tinge of respect there in God's voice towards the city of Nineveh. And Jonah didn't want to go to the city of Nineveh. God said, "Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it because its wickedness has come up before me." Jonah had no love in his heart for the Ninevites and probably for the city of Nineveh, which was its capital. And God says to Jonah, go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it. Again, I'm curious about that, the way it's read there in the NIV, preach against it. That's what oftentimes happens when preachers come to our cities. They preach against the wickedness that they see represented in the city. How do you look at a city? Um, Jesus wept two times in the New Testament. Once he wept when his friend Lazarus died, and the other time he wept over the city of Jerusalem. When was the last time you wept for a city? God loves cities. And here in the book of Jonah, God says, "Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it." Now, perhaps God was using that negative language to a negative prophet in order for him to do something that he didn't want to do so that God's way would be worked out nevertheless. What do we learn here right away? Mission is not about what you want to do. Mission is about what God is doing. What is God doing? Well, he's doing many things, but one of the things that's obviously happening in today's world is he's urbanizing the world. The world is moving to the cities. And if the world is moving to the cities, then where are we going? I had to think about that a lot. I originally, what I wanted to do with my life when I went to YWAM in 1975 in Lausanne, Switzerland, I wanted to finish that School of Evangelism and then go back to Western Michigan and get my degree at Western Michigan University in forestry and become a national park ranger and count squirrels and birds and trees. I love the nature. But God had a different plan for my life. He called me to India. I was kind of like, "God, I don't want to go to India. Why would I want to go to India?" Mission is not about what you want to do. Mission is about what God is doing. Now, that doesn't mean that God tortures us to do something that we just hate doing. You know what it often means? It means that God knows really what we are created to do, but sometimes it's a stretch to get to that place. He has to pull it out of us before we really understand what it is we enjoy doing. God called Jonah to Nineveh. And Jonah didn't like the Ninevites. They're wicked, they're decadent, they're barbarian. They were the terrorists of that time. Why would I want to preach to them? How do you look at the city? Let me say something to you. The role of the missionary is to love the people and the place where God has put you. The role of the missionary, I want to say it again, the role of the missionary is to love the people and to love the place where God has put you. The book of Jonah is not just about the revival in Nineveh. It's about the attempted transformation of the messenger, Jonah. And we know what happens to Jonah. He falls into the belly of a whale. And while he's in that belly of the whale, there's an attempted transformation of his life. And when you turn to chapter 2, you can see that transformation was starting to happen. But unfortunately, we find in chapter 4 that it was not a complete transformation. But in chapter 2, Jonah's in the belly of the whale, and he cries out to the Lord. He says, "In my distress, I called to the Lord." Verse 1, and he answered me, "From deep in the realm of the dead, I called for help, and you listened to my cry." There's seems to be a transformation taking place. You go to the end of that chapter 2, and Jonah says, "Those who cling to worthless idols turn away from God's love for them. But I, with shouts of grateful praise, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed, I will make good. I will say, salvation comes from the Lord." Verse 10, and this is something dramatic happens here. "And the Lord commanded the fish, and it vomited Jonah onto dry land." Ray Bakke, the urban missiologist, comments on this passage, and he says, it's quite funny that God vomits Jonah, as if his statement to Jonah is, "You're not quite there yet." Ray Bakke says, we all know that when a person eats a bad fish or a spoiled fish, they get sick. But here's a big fish that swallowed a bad man, and it got sick. The book of Jonah is not only about trying to transform a city, but the book of Jonah is about the transformation of ourself. And the role of the missionary is to love the people that God has called him to and the place that God has called him to. So what's your attitude towards cities? I'd like you to take some time right now and pause and think about how do you see cities? How do you see urban locations? What are the negative things that you see? And what are the positive things that you see? And I want you to take time and reflect on that. And I'll tell you a story before you do that. I chair my neighborhood police department in the neighborhood where I live here in San Francisco, which is probably the worst neighborhood in the whole city. 30,000 people, 25 languages, 3,000 people homeless. If you come to our YWAM center and visit us, you'll find people all over the front door, by our front door, on our sidewalk, shooting up drugs and fights breaking out and people without homes to live in. And we open our doors every day and we let people come in and we minister to them. But a lot of people stay away from my neighborhood in San Francisco because of its toughness, because of the darkness that's there. And the police department puts out a newsletter every month, and each month they select a citizen of the month, and they selected me one month to write about. And they took me through an interview, and I was being interviewed by a cop who walks the streets and drives the streets every day for 8 years. He knows my neighborhood. He asked me at the end of the interview, he said, Tim, what's your favorite place in all of San Francisco? Because he wanted to write something in an interview about that. Well, there's many beautiful places in San Francisco, but without skipping a beat, I said to him, oh, my favorite place in the whole city is right here in our neighborhood, the Tenderloin. That's the name of our neighborhood. It's called the Tenderloin National Forest. He looked at me and he said, where is that? Now, he had been a cop for 8 years and he didn't know where it was. The Tenderloin National Forest is a little alley that the artist of my neighborhood took over. And they mosaic tiled the street and they muraled the buildings on the side and they put a redwood tree and a cherry blossom tree and a pizza oven and a fish pond and plants all in the alley. And I often go there to pray. And the policeman said to me, where is this alley you're talking about? I said, oh, officer. I said, just 2 blocks from where we're having coffee together today. He said, I've never heard of it. I've never seen it. He had been policing the streets for 8 years. At the end of the interview, he said to me, Tim, he said, I learned something today. He said, I'm a cop. I look for the problems. And I go home every night and I'm burned out. He said, but what I learned today was that you're looking for the potentials. And that's how you keep refreshed. The role of the missionary is to love the place where he is, no matter how hard it is, how dark it may be. We love it. We engage with it. That's how Mother Teresa stayed alive as she ministered to the dying of Calcutta. She saw Jesus in them. And that kept her refreshed. Take some time and talk about what are the positives of living in the city? What are the negatives of living in the city? And what might be your negative attitudes towards the city that's blocking you from hearing God saying to you, go to that great city and preach my love to it. I'll see you soon.